this transition to an automated process where you should be receiving, again, if you need to submit one, and a notice from the county via email. And I believe those forms are due on April 1st. And then the final one, SANTEC started on undertaking a development of a ConOps to enhance our Traveler 501 travel information services, what we're calling our next generation 501. And we just initiated this week and coming to all of you that this is going to be probably something that's going to be presented to this working group. But essentially, the intent behind the ConOps is to examine how can we improve and set the platform for within the context of their next operating system for the travel information component to improve access to transportation information for all transportation users, including the disabled, the elderly, low income and multilingual populations. Also look at functionality or needs for improved access to multimodal trip planning and booking services. Provide traveler with more information that will provide more convenient access to transportation options, and really start thinking about how we could consider innovations in the private sector to improve our travel information services to the public more efficiently. And then another key component is how can we improve the interregional coordination with other travel information services and other applications in the region, but also with our neighboring counties and also the folks down in the South Bay or Mexico, in light of a lot of activities that are happening to improve our and implement our OTIME East project. But again, we're just starting. So one thing here is if you all, any of you are interested in participating as specific PDT members, just shoot me an email and we'll get you more information on that. With that, those are the announcements on the Sandex side. And I'll turn it over to Tim. I think we have a one hand raised, Chair.
Please go ahead.
Yes, that's correct. Nicole, you should be able to unmute yourself now and provide public comments if you wish.
Good morning. Yes, this is Nicole Burgess, and I appreciate the time to make a public comment to this advisory board. And thank you, Chair Mo, and all of the committee members for the time. As you all, most of you are the engineers and the folks responsible for creating safer streets for all users. It's just really grateful to have you here and to be able to comment to all of you. As an active commuter, bike commuter in San Diego, I'm truly grateful for all the work of City of San Diego that they've done. As streets are resurfaced, they are taking the opportunity to repurpose them and redesign them and make them and create them safer for all users. And I think this is being done in other cities as well. And so I applaud all the efforts there. And I just want to bring attention because City of San Diego is using a new type of bicycle facility that I just want to make sure that all cities are aware of. And I'm excited to see them roll out in City of San Diego. And then those are considered edge lanes, also known as advisory lanes. There's quite a few great information from Portland about the value of these. These are, in my opinion, I've used these in other countries, and they provide a separated space for people on bikes and are a great alternative for sharrows. Most of us know that sharrows are not a great use for people to share the roads with high-speeding vehicles. And so these edge lanes, advisory lanes, are just a really great new type of facility that I hope we can see throughout our region from others of you in other cities. And I'm not sure, a second comment, if Poway is on this meeting, but Poway is undergoing some major construction on Pomerado Road, and that is one of those big opportunities to really create a Class 4 bikeway along that when that street is resurfaced, as it is an extremely fast corridor with fast moving traffic, and it really has a need for a better, safer facility along Pomerado. So just want to thank you all. And just lastly, Mayor John Balters up in Emeryville has some great policy handbooks for people-centric cities. And I highly recommend this, all of you to take the time to follow John Balters from Emeryville to really transform and create better spaces for people that are moving, walking, biking, and using other modes to really change the mode shift here in San Diego. Appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Tim, I still see a hand raised. Is that a new one or is that just
Chair, I don't believe there's any more hands, or at least I don't see any.
okay? Yeah. Yeah, if anybody wishes to speak, you can also turn on your camera or turn on your speaker. Okay, seeing none, and that this item is completed. I'll turn it over to Mo. Thank you.
Thank you, Minji. We are on item number 3, which is approval of the minutes. Tim is going to basically take care of this process. Sounds like we do have quorum for CTAC, at least for now. So I entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the February 2022 CTAC meeting. And turn it over to Tim to basically call the roll and also take the votes.
Thank you, Chair. So if I understand correctly, you entertain the motion. We would also need a second as well.
Mr. Chair, can I second it as a SANTEC meeting, as SANTEC member? No? Yes.
Here, so we have representatives from the county. I believe Bill Morgan is here, so he would be taking the representation for CTAC for the county.
Sounds good.
This is Bill Morgan. I'd be happy to second that motion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. So we have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Thank you. So we'll start with City of Carlsbad for CTAC.
Good morning, Hossein Ajide with City of Carlsbad, abstain.
Thank you. City of Chula Vista.
Frank Rivera, CTAC, Chula Vista, approve.
Thank you. City of Coronado.
Jim Newton, Coronado, abstain.
Thank you. City of Del Mar. Not seeing anyone. City of El Cajon. City of Encinitas. City of Escondido.
Yes, good morning. Julie Procopio, CTAC, approve.
Thank you. City of Imperial Beach. City of La Mesa.
Phil Kern, City of La Mesa, approve.
Thank you. City of Lemon Grove. City of National City.
Jose Lopez, City of National City, abstain.
Thank you. City of Oceanside. City of Poway.
Melody Rocco, City of Poway, abstain.
Thank you. City of San Diego.
Gary Cooley, City of San Diego, approved.
Thank you. City of San Marcos. City of Santee.
Ninjime, City of Santee, approved.
Thank you. City of Solana Beach.
Mo Samak, approved.
Thank you. City of Vista.
Matt Atterbury, City of Vista, approve.
Thank you. City of County of San Diego.
Bill Morgan, County of San Diego, approve.
Thank you. NCTD. And finally, MTS. Chair, with that, I'll hand it over to you. And we do have quorum, and we also have the minutes approved for CTAC.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tim. So we're on SANTEC now. I'd like to entertain a motion for approval of the meeting of the February 2020 meeting. Do I have a first?
Move to approve.
Correction,
Superior
Chair.
County of San Diego.
Hold on 1 second, please.
Sorry, for the record, it will be the January meeting minutes.
I am sorry. I'm sorry, Tim. Sorry about that. January meeting. And Zubair, I hear that you moved to
Yes.
approve the minutes. Very good. Thank you
Yes.
very much. Go ahead, Tim.
Oliver Garcia, Chula Vista, second.
Thank you. And with that, we'll start with Caltrans for SANTEC. I'm not seeing anyone. City of Carlsbad.
John Kim, City of Carlsbad, abstain.
Thank you. City of Chula Vista.
Oliver Garcia, Chula Vista, approve.
Thank you. City of Coronado.
Jim Newton, Coronado, abstain.
Thank you. City of Del Mar. City of El Cajon. City of Encinitas.
A. Bandigan, City of Encinitas, abstain.
Thank you. City of Escondido.
Ed Alberto, City of Escondido, approve.
Thank you. City of Imperial Beach. City of La Mesa.
Phil Kern, City of La Mesa, SANTEC alternate, approve.
Thank you. City of Lemon Grove. City of National City. Jose. Now we can come back to City of National City.
I'm not a member of SANTEC, only CTAC. Lucas Apiello is our alternate. He's not present.
Okay, noted. Thank you. City of Oceanside. City of Poway.
Melody Rocco, City of Poway, abstain.
Thank you. City of San Diego.
Maureen Gardner, City of San Diego, approve.
Thank you. City of San Marcos. City of Santee.
Minjime, City of Santee, approve.
Thank you. City of Solana Beach.
Jim Greenstein, City of Solana Beach, I approve.
Thank you. City of Vista.
Sam Hassanen, City of Vista, approve.
Thank you. County of San Diego.
Zubir Wada, County of San Diego, approve.
Thank you. North County Transit. And MTS. Chair, with that, the meeting minutes for January SANTEC have been approved, and we also have confirmed quorum.
Okay, thank you, Tim. So I'll continue with item number 4 and 5. Do you see it? These two items we're putting in the category under consent, meaning that there will be no presentation for them. And this particular two items today, one is the basically the Transnet RT-CIP fee adjustment, which is the annual thing. I'm sure most of you are already familiar with. And the number 5 is for Caltrans Updates. So unless anybody has questions or just want to hold item, we're not going to have any presentation on this thing. So do I see any hands or raised? I do see a hand raised. Please go ahead and speak. Oh, Tim, is that a hand from previous?
I believe so.
Okay. So seeing none, and that's it. We're done with that item. And before I turn it over to Mo, I'm testing on my background that it probably looks kind of choppy, so bear with me. Thank you.
If I may, Chairman Minjime, can you just get closer to the microphone too?
Okay, sorry. Yeah,
yeah.
Please let me know because my microphone don't work that well.
And then also, just for the record, we didn't hear any members to pull in those two items.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Minji and Alex, for the explanation. So we're on item number 6. This is the advancement of the CTAC and SANTEC working group restructuring. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of work that is happening behind the scene. And there are some, in my opinion, improvement to organization and organizing the meetings on a regular basis. And we have some exciting news. And so I want to turn it to Alex to go over some of the highlights of these proposals, and then perhaps give us a roadmap, if you will, Alex, for the upcoming meetings and how we are going to go through the transition process. Alex, you're on.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. And this is really simply an update. I know that this working groups and all of you have been working with us in really transitioning to the establishment of new working groups. So in fact, over the past, I believe, almost year and a half, one of the key things that we worked with all of you is developing a charter, and we brought to you a draft charter, and then we got your input. But based on that, then that charter was reviewed internally, and then we presented, based on your input again, the charter to Sandex Executive Committee in February. And that charter was approved. And what that means is then we could begin on kind of the implementation of the new working group, really with the idea of establishing that through June. But just for some background, the membership of this new working group, the mobility working group, it will include 1 voting member and 1 alternate for each of your agencies, including our transit partners, the Port of San Diego, the Regional Airport Authority. And really one of the key differences here is based on your input. We wanted to make sure that there's value for this working group and all of you and your agencies, but also a greater connection so we could help advance a lot of the activities directly to the TC. So it is a voting member. And in fact, one of the key components here, and if you recall in the charter that we presented before we took it to the executive committee, is that the Transportation Committee Chair will appoint a TC member to serve as the chair of the mobility working group. But also for purposes of consistency, we're not the only sort of working group that are working through these new restructuring changes, but so it's all the planning related working groups, and they created a sustainable communities working group. And that working group is going to be reporting directly to the Regional Planning Committee. And moving forward, one of the first things that we're going to do, again, to maintain consistency with the overall agency process for implementing these new working groups, staff will be reaching out to city managers and ask for delegations for a primary and alternate for the mobility from all of you, the working group. And also the same thing will happen by the Sustainable Community Working Group. So they'll be reaching out to city managers to select the appropriate delegated staff for primary and alternate members. So if what we'll do is when we send out the letter, we'll copy all of you. And then I'll leave it up to all of you to chat with their city managers and discuss the appropriate representation for the new mobility working group. And then finally, we do expect to have this as a standing item. Again, we have to work through some more details over their next months through June. So we'll have a standing item and staff, and we're thinking of bringing back the work plan that we provided late last year, and all of you provided some input to that. So we'll bring it back so we can start revising it and finalizing. And again, one of the key elements that we explained when we had these original discussion is that these working groups will be really led by an annual work plan that we all will have to develop to identify the key subject matters as we carry out our activities. So it's essentially an update. There's going to be a standing item, and I'll be happy to answer any questions at this point.
maybe just to get the dialogue going, Alex, in your opinion, can you put in some high-level timeline on the future changes that may occur?
Right. So between now and then, obviously, I mentioned that you work through your city managers so you can start determining who the appropriate representatives for this new working group, the mobility working group, will serve. And we anticipate to finalize that probably, and hopefully we'll share the list if by, I would say, maybe the next meeting. So that will be one thing. The other thing too is finalizing the work plan, so then we could have a pretty good picture on what items will be coming forward. And I'm figuring that at least the work plan will probably finalize it by May. So then we could really transition to the new working group structure starting in June. So in June, technically, at that point, then we'll start referencing our new working group with the new name, but also we'll have a list of all the assigned representatives from each agency.
Very good. Thank you. Sam?
I have a question. Oh, maybe I should have raised my hand. I'm sorry.
That's okay. We saw your video. That's an indication. Good job.
Just quickly, just to kind of confirm, I guess, so the mobility working group is going to replace CTAC and SANTEC and the active transportation working group.
That's correct, Sam.
And then on the planning side, there's going to be another, just a planning committee, correct?
Correct.
And you'll be looking for a primary representative and an alternate maybe, or something like that for each.
Yeah, it's a
group?
primary and an alternate, just like what we have here.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Julie?
Hi, yes. Thank you so much. I think one of the things that would be helpful for me as we look forward over the next year into developing the work plan is to understand from Sandex staff what you project might be presented to the Transportation Committee as well as to the board with respect to transportation issues. So I think if we had a good understanding as to, hey, this is what's coming forward and this is when, that would allow us to give you some feedback on, hey, we'd like to have some input and some discussions on these particular topics. So if that's something you could educate us on at some point, that'd be very helpful, Alex.
And I think, Julie, that's a great point. Maybe we'll chat with internal staff. Maybe we'll also include that work plan in that manager's letter. So, but we'll copy you guys on that email, but then we'll flesh out more of the details of the work plan, just to give the manager some insight of some of the items that will be forthcoming to this from a general perspective to the new mobility working group. But then we'll bring back the details and we'll start laying out the timeline for the specific elements, Julie.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Julie. Zubair?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's also following in the same line of Julie. For us, big agencies, it would be helpful to see if this member is participating more in the technical level or more in the funding strategic level of the region. So that would be because I mean, you're talking about the county where, we have different people in different places. So we got to figure out who is really best to represent. So it would be helpful if you're talking really technical, that you want help, or you're really talking about, I don't know, the funding or whatever. We may need to make a decision on how much money goes to this and or whatever. So.
Thanks, Zubair. No, yes.
You're welcome. Oh, lower it. Lower it.
There's Chair, there's also a public comment from Nicole.
Go ahead, Nicole.
All right, I think you can hear me. Sorry.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate this information, and I have been a participant in the Active Transportation Working Group, and I actually sit on the military working group. So I know that these working groups are really valuable for how SANDEG, how it feeds into the SANDEG regional plan. So as you talk about city managers to dedicate an appropriate staff person, you the traffic engineers, the city managers that are on this call today, I want you to consider appointing representatives that actually use active transportation and transit to move in our city. So as designers of our streets, it is critical that all of us, that we use these streets as active commuters. If we design as a car user, that's how we continue to design. So it's hard. As an active commuter, I just want to make sure that that is represented. And I know we have wonderful active commuters in this region. So hopefully we can get those engineers to be active commuters. And so I even think of that. I added transit in there because those rural areas are difficult, but we have to all be leaders to really change the mode shift here. And I think the big title, Alex, if you could correct me, it was Sustainability and Mobility Working Group. Is that correct?
I was in mute. It's Sustainable Communities Working Group.
Sustainable Mobility Working
Communities Working Group.
Communities. Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
And just a point of clarification, Nicole, all the appointed members will be local agencies that will have a vote, but members like you can still participate in these working groups.
Correct. And I understand that. And I'm just encouraging our engineers to be active commuters. And I really want to encourage us to really be mindful of how we're designing our streets. And if we're not using them as active riders and bikers and walkers, then we forget how to really dedicate those. And I just wanted to lastly, if I could, just say hello to Julie and Rocco. My ride is from Point Loma to Escondido to see my mom. So that's why Pomerado has been occurring to me the last month. And that's why I was excited to join this group this morning. So thank you so much.
Chair, I don't see any other hands raised.
Thank you, Alex. I just wanted to go back to Zubair's comment or questions. Don't personally have any solid response for your questions, Zubair. I'm gonna basically talk to Alex. Maybe we can follow that up by an email or something. Unless, Alex, you have anything to add?
No, I mean, we discussed this, but I'll circle back with Sabir. But the intent of the working group is to have a direct line of reporting to the TC. And to the extent possible, the working group will provide kind of programmatic, high-level input, but based on all of your input. But we will also have the opportunity through the task forces to take a deeper dive on the technical issues, Sabir. So the opportunity will be there. But the structure itself, we just want to make sure that all of you have a direct line of relationship in reporting to the TC.
And then if I could supplement a couple of comments. The way I see it is right now, the complexion of this group that we are participating together on a regular basis is that you have the city engineers, deputy directors, and the engineering departments. And you also have traffic engineers. In most organizations, both positions have either direct communication with the city managers or within maybe one line of chain of command with the city managers of their own agencies. So in general, if any of those two individuals are identified for the new group, as the first and primary and secondary, it would just basically put the decision as to which meetings the primary should participate or the secondary should participate back on the agency alone. So I think the way Alex thought about these things, it makes sense and it is pretty consistent. It's in line with what we're doing today. Hopefully that addresses your concern, Zubair.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Tim, do you see any other raised hands or person that willing or wishing to speak?
No, Chair, I do not.
Thank you very much. Minji, you're on for the next item.
Thank you, Mo. Yeah, item number 7 is an update of the Transnet Extension Ordinance funding overview by Sandex staff. We'll provide an overview and update on the program balances. That will be done by Ariana and Jim. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Good morning, CTAC and SANTEC members. Good to see all of you. So I'm going to be kicking off this presentation, and then Jim is going to be providing the updated forecast. And then after he does that, I'll take it from there, provide you with how the funds are distributed and leveraged and some of the major accomplishments to date. We'll try to go through this quickly. It is a long one. So next slide, please. So I think you all know better than any other group, what Transnet is, but the presentation we're providing to you today is a combination of the 2 presentations that we've provided to our board recently on both the updated Transnet revenue forecasts, and then also we provided kind of a deep dive into each sub-program. So today's focus will be on how the Transnet Ordinance priority projects and programs are funded, not just by revenue generated by the local half-cent sales tax, but all of the other federal, state, and local funds that SANDEC and its partner agencies use in order to deliver on the commitments to the region. And as you know, in November 2004, 2/3 of voters approved a 40-year extension of Transnet, which generates funds for public transit, highway, local street and road improvements. And SANDEC leverages these funds with state and federal sources to improve the region's transportation infrastructure. And since the extension took effect in 2008, SANDEC has partnered with all of you, Caltrans, MTS, and CTD, to deliver critical infrastructure projects. And through the Aggressive Early Action Program, a variety of high priority transportation projects were accelerated, and the region also delivered on habitat conservation, land management projects, active transportation, and other grant programs. And as you know, the measure also mandated that there be an independent taxpayer oversight committee, or ITAC, to provide an enhanced level of accountability and transparency for the expenditure of the funds and to develop recommendations for improvements over the life of the program. Next slide, please. So to start, I just want to remind everyone about the flow of funds chart. It shows how the funds are distributed across various Transnet programs or sub-programs per the ordinance language. In the black boxes, we have the off the top, which are the administration, the ITAC, and the bicycle and pedestrian programs. And then the rest of the money is distributed based on percentages allocated to each sub-program. Next slide, please. So Jim is going to give you the detail behind this slide, but I'll just share a very high level overview of what this information means. The slide is intended to show graphically how much has been dispersed or committed to projects. The current long-term forecast for Transnet revenue indicates that between 2008 and 2048, 13.3 billion will be generated by the half-cent sales tax. 6.9 of that you can see up at the top left of that 13.3 billion has been dispersed or committed. And then 6.4 is the remaining revenue shown on the right upper side. Remaining revenue estimated to be available between now and 2048. And as a reminder, at your in February, you may have heard that we presented to the board and the ITAC, as we typically do each year, on our short-term revenue forecast. And we did share that revenues in the short term are up, but in the long term, we still have funding needs that will need to be met by working together with all our partner agencies to continue pursuing additional funding for the region to complete the program. In terms of how much Transnet has been allocated to each sub-program since its inception, we can see that for example, the major corridors, highway and transit capital sub-program, the region has allocated 4 billion in just Transnet funding since 2008 when the ordinance went into effect. You can also see, for example, the local street and road improvements. The cities and the county have received 1.1 billion in Transnet to support delivery of their capital improvement programs, and our operators have received close to 870 million to support their delivery of transit services and operations. So collectively, since 2008, Transnet has benefited the region with about 6.9 billion allocated across these various sub-programs, augmenting other funding that the region's transit operators, all of you at your local jurisdictions, and all Transnet recipient agencies receive from other sources. So I'm going to take a step back and give Jim the opportunity to walk us through how we came to this current forecast. And then when he's done, I can walk us through each individual sub-program.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jim Miller. I'm a senior economist here at SANDEC. Can I have the next slide, please? Next. this one's animated, so we'll go through it. This is a slide that many of you have probably seen before. It's been around for a couple of years, and these are our actual collections in the green bars that you can see from Transnet. And the original Transnet funding ordinance is in the very light green on the left to 2007, and then the Transnet extension begins in 2008. Forward, please. So this was our original forecast for Transnet 2, the Transnet extension that we developed in 2002 at SANDAG before my time. But you can see for the first 5 years or so, it tracked very well with actual collections. We expected to be collecting about $22 billion here. But then, of course, right as Transnet 2 was, we were starting to collect funds from Transnet 2, the Great Recession hit, and that changed a great deal. Next slide, next, please. So you can see a lot did change, and now our current forecast is 13.3 billion, not 21.8 billion, and that's in 2020 dollars. One of the main reasons for this is that our population forecast is a lot lower. Back in 2002, we anticipated having about 4.4 million San Diegans in 2050, and now we're expecting to have about 1 million fewer tax-paying San Diegans in 2050, but also the pattern of expenditures for people changed during the Great Recession. So our current forecast, you can see if we advance one, really is in line with the trend if you were just to draw a trend line through the actual collections. That's not how we come up with forecasts, though. We do a consensus forecast. We purchase outside economic forecasts from 3 vendors, and we do basically a geometric mean of their per capita income, per capita taxable retail sales to get our long-term forecast out to 2048. Next slide, please. This just shows the collections back in 2002 dollars. Many of you may be familiar with this. You can see in column E, we are collecting and expect to collect only about 60% of the revenue that we originally had intended to collect. Next slide, please. So this shows you a little bit more about where we are. Ariana alluded to this. You can see our updated revenue forecast at the bottom of column C is 13.3 billion. Of that, in column D, we have already dispersed about 3.7 billion. So you'd say we have 9.7 billion remaining revenues. But that is not essentially true because we have already committed to another 3.2 billion in funds. So we really, as Ariana said, have about 6.4 billion remaining to collect by category. And I'll go through those categories now. Next slide, please. Local streets and roads are about 29% of Transnet. And you can see that we have about 3.7 billion through 2048 to collect and disperse. And we have about about 2.6 billion of that pot left to collect and disseminate. Next slide, please. Another pass-through is to our transit services. We collect 16.5 at Transnet and give them to our transit operators to cover operations. We are looking at about 2.1 billion in total revenue in that pot, with about 1.5 billion left. Next slide, please. Another pass-through is our Smart Growth Incentive Program. We're expecting to collect total about 270 million, and we have about 222 million of that left. Next slide. So the bike and pedestrian revenues are one of the pots that SANDAG does control. And as you'll recall, in 2013, the board of directors instructed us to start building projects early before we collect all the revenue. So we have bonded against that program. Next slide. So you see the blue bars are what we have expended already, and the blue dotted line is what we have committed. So you can see, though we expect to collect about 270 million long term, we have really already committed with our early action plans 260 million of that roughly. So we have about $8 million that we're expecting remaining in that category. Next slide, please. Similar story with our environmental management plan. These are combined revenues for the local streets and roads and major corridors, EMP. So we're expecting to collect about 800 million. Next slide. But again, because we have been active early and bonded against some of these funds, we have committed over 700 million of our expected revenues and only have about 80 million available. Next slide, please. Major corridors, the massive, most massive part of Transnet, 38% of our revenues. We're expecting to collect about $4.9 billion for the major corridors over the life of Transnet 2. Next slide. But as you can see, we've done a lot of work early. We built the Mid-Coast. We've built a lot of highway projects. So we've already committed and bonded against about $4 billion of the $4.9 billion that we're expecting to collect, leaving about 860 million roughly that we're expecting to collect. Next slide, please. And this is also true of our major corridor transit operations, the 8.1% transit funding pot that we have, in addition to the 16.5 that we pass through to the transit operators. Next slide. This pays for specific transit operations. Those include the Superloop, our rapid buses, the Mid-Coast trolley, and coaster frequency increases. We're also looking at future services, mostly frequency increases and a couple of new rapid lines. So if you could, next slide, please. So you can see that we have collected a fair bit of money. We expect, next please, to collect about $1 billion in total revenue. And so far, our revenues have been more than our expenditures. Next slide. But as you can see, we expect to collect about $1 billion in revenue for this pod, but if we were to fully fund the operations of all these transit projects that were mentioned in Transnet, we would need about $1.6 billion. And even if we were to fund, next slide, even if we were only fund existing services through 2048, we would still be short about $130 million. Next slide, please. If you could go forward just a couple. So this is the final slide I have. Again, this is a summary of where we are with all these projects. And again, we have 6.4 billion remaining, but as you can see, or as you have seen, most of that is in the pass-through funds. And we've really, the board is going to get together and discuss potentially amending the Transnet ordinance to reprioritize remaining funds, but it remains to be seen how that conversation will go. So I'll pass it back to Ariana now.
Thanks, Jim. Next slide, please. So, Transnet's a success story. Transnet dollars leveraged with state and federal funds have helped to pay for upgrades to the region's highways, including the, and maybe, yeah, you can click again because we've got some slides here to share. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So upgrades to the region's highways, including the 20-mile I-15 express lanes, the I-5 North Coast Corridor, extensions of the San Diego Trolley and coaster commuter rail lines, acquisition of nearly 9,000 acres for habitat conservation in San Diego, and then discounted transit passes for disabled people, senior students, the Mid-Coast Trolley extension, of course, more than 800 local road projects that the cities have built with their local allocations for much needed improvements within their jurisdictions. And then of course, bicycle and pedestrian improvements such as the Bayshore Bikeway, our I-15 commuter bike facility, as well as the Inland Rail Trail. Next slide, please. So what comes next? Next slide, please. So let's go ahead and recap the prior actions that have led us to consider amending the ordinance. The Transnet ITAC, as you know, conducts triennial performance audits. They've developed recommendations for improvements to the program consistent with their role. So proposed amendments to the ordinance would address those recommendations from the FY18 and FY21 audits. The board also conducted its 10-year review in 2019, which also included recommendations to improve the program going forward. The ordinance also requires consistency with the regional plan. And as we know, the 2021 regional plan was a major update. So that requires that the expenditure plan be reviewed for consistency to ensure that revenue can be made available for projects. We're taking the results of the ITAC audits, the board's 10-year review, and the priority projects and programs from the newly adopted 2021 regional plan, and we will be consolidating that into a package of potential ordinance amendments. In November, we began our series of presentations. We also came to CTAC at that time. We provided an overview of the proposed amendments and draft concept to get your initial feedback. And in December, Ray Major provided an update to the board on the Transnet revenue forecast through 2048 when the program sunsets. And that's what we shared with you today. He shared the amounts also of the remaining Transnet funding available by sub-program, as we shared with you today as well. The board had asked our transit operator partners and Sandex to come up with a plan to help deliver on the transit service and operations commitments made in light of Transnet revenues coming in lower than originally anticipated. And next slide, please. So Jim shared this slide with you earlier. We heard that the amount remaining, the 6.4 million, is only one piece of the funding puzzle. The next thing we want to share with you are all the other funds available within each sub-program, which can help augment the local Transnet revenue in order to continue to deliver on our commitments and implement the vision laid out in the 2021 regional plan. And continued collaboration with our partners, MTS and CTD, Caltrans, all of you, is going to be critical to maximizing the leveraging opportunities and bringing it much needed resources to the region. So that with that, let's go through each sub-program. Next slide, please. So actually, can you back up one slide, please? So before I start, it's just important to note that as we walk through each of these slides that I'm going to be sharing with you today, we just all need to keep in mind that the amounts we're showing you are through the end of the program in 2048. So when you see remaining funds on a slide, these funds are not available today in the bank, for example. They're not available today, but rather they are anticipated to be available through the life of the ordinance. Next slide, please. So this is the major corridor capital project section of the ordinance. This section provides for the implementation of highway and transit capital projects. 38% of the net revenues, which you see up at the top in the green bar, of the net revenues from Transnet go toward this bucket of funding. And as you can see, there's about 4 billion in Transnet that has been dispersed, as Jim shared. And that 4 billion has been dispersed and committed in the form of debt service, for instance, to this pot of funding. So about 80% of the funding is already spoken for, leaving the other 18% or 866 million remaining in this category. Next slide, please. And in terms of additional outside sources of funding that contribute under this section, those make up about 70% and are shown here in the blue on the chart, with the Transnet bringing in the other 30 or so and shown in green. There's a wide variety of other fund sources used to help fund this program, which you can see here, including federal funding, such as Federal Transit Administration and federal highway dollars, state programs such as Cap and Trade and SB1, also known as the RMRA, as well as local funding. Next slide, please. Another bucket within Transnet is the Major Corridor Environmental Mitigation Program, or EMP. This bucket is used to fund direct expenditures for mitigation of the major corridor projects. And while this bucket accounts for 4.4%, which you can see in the bar at the top in green, 4.4% of the overall pot of funding within the program, it's also considered part of the major corridors 38% bucket that we just reviewed. So the funding within this program has been used to acquire about 8,800 acres for mitigation, which is more than 5 times the size of Balboa Park, and helps to demonstrate how to proactively protect and conserve the environment and also responsibly deliver critical transportation infrastructure. Given our current revenue projections, we will be short by about 113 million for this pot, and this will need to be paid for by the major corridors pot, again, because this pot is considered part of the overall 38% major corridor bucket. On the earlier slide that we showed you, the remaining balance under major corridors was 866 million. So when you subtract this 113 million we're showing here, you get 753, and that is the overall remaining amount for the major corridor bucket. That is, of course, unless something changes in in revenue collections between now and 2048. Next slide, please. In addition to Transnet, the agency uses other federal funds such as Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality, or CMAQ funding, as well as Regional Surface Transportation Program, or RSTP funding, with Transnet contributing the majority here as shown in green. Next slide, please. So for the local street and road program, there's 29.1% of Transnet funds that are allocated to this pot, shown in green at the top. 1.1 billion in Transnet has been dispersed and is passed through directly to all of you. These funds are distributed on a formulaic basis to the local agencies, which you can see on the right-hand side. You can see that of the total funding available through 2048, 30% has been dispersed, and that's shown in purple, with another 70% remaining. And I'm going to take this opportunity just to remind everyone again that this does not mean that SANTEC has 2.6 billion sitting in a bank, but rather the remaining funds would be anticipated to be available through the life of the ordinance. Next slide, please. So here you can see how the local street and road formula funds supplement other revenues. For local street and road improvements, you can see the detail by local jurisdiction in terms of what each city or the county has received to date. Some of the other fund types used for this category include development impact fees, general fund, and state formula and competitive funding, among others, as you all know. And with this funding, our local agencies have completed hundreds of projects, resulting in citywide improvements that include new major roads, repaved streets, pothole repairs, local bikeways, sidewalk, and many other improvements. Next slide, please. So just like the major corridors has an EMP provision, Transnet also included an EMP as part of the local street and road provision in the ordinance. So this local EMP fund gets about 2.1% of the net funding available. 37 million in Transnet has been dispersed so far to fund habitat-related mitigation for local transportation projects. That's about 16% of the funding that has already been put to use, leaving over 80% remaining through the life of the ordinance. It's important to note that the EMP is a lockbox provision, meaning that it cannot be changed by a 2/3 vote of the commission, but rather would need to go to voters. Next slide, please. So the next one on the list is transit services. There's two pots of funding for transit. There's this one that is specifically for transit services for things like reduced fares for seniors and disabled persons and youth transit passes. I'll talk about the other funding on the next slide. But for this pot of funding, the ordinance provides 16.5% of Transnet funds for these transit services. 608 million has been dispersed to MTS and NCTD. That's a disbursement of about 29% of the overall pot. That leaves about 71% remaining to be collected through the end of the ordinance. Next slide, please. So the ordinance also supports, as I mentioned, another pot for transit, and it allocates 8.1% of Transnet funding for specific transit projects. This funding is only for new or expanded services such as operations on the Midcoast. A total of 131 million in Transnet has been dispersed. The total amount of remaining funding is forecast to be about 900 million, or 87%, which you can see in the gray color on the chart. And remember that this remaining amount is through the life of the ordinance. And we've been collecting these monies since 2008 when the ordinance went into effect. And we've been banking these while new services were coming online. And then while we continue to collect revenues under this pot of funding, we are projecting spending it more quickly than we are collecting it. So while we still get and spend a lot of this funding every year, by about 2030, we already know that it won't be enough to cover because of the way of the funding in the bucket is being dispersed. So those discussions are happening between SANDAG and our operators, which is why we brought this issue up early so that we can help solve for it. Next, please. In terms of other funds used for both transit services and operations, this slide shows us the other fund types used by MTS and NCTD, and that's in blue. And then to complement Transnet funding, which is shown in purple and red, in support of the services and operations our transit operators provide. It's important to note that the majority of funding, which is again shown in the blue color, comes from additional funding sources such as the State Transportation Development Act, or TDA, as well as State Transit Assistance, or STA funding, and Federal Transit Administration funding, and passenger fares in particular, with Transnet making up just 12% for MTS and 14% for NCTD, again shown in purple and red. Next slide, please. So the next one on the list is the Bicycle Pedestrian Neighborhood Safety Program, also known as Bpns. The total funds dispersed and committed to this program from Transnet are approximately 258 million, which is shown in purple. That also includes debt service for borrowing under this bucket. That means that about 97% of the funding in this pot of money has been dispersed or committed already, leaving only 3% available. But this funding has been used to advance projects like the Bayshore Bikeway, the Inland Rail Trail, Coastal Rail Trail, and the SR-15 commuter bikeway, among others. Next slide, please. So the ordinance provides a total of 2% for this bucket. Additional funding sources contributing include the state's active transportation program, or ATP, and other state and federal program funding like TDA and SB1, among others, with Transnet contributing the majority. Next, please. And then last but not least, the ordinance includes a 2.1% set aside of funds that are to be allocated to the Smart Growth Incentive Program to provide funding for a broad array of transportation related infrastructure improvements to assist local agencies in better integrating transportation and land use. And approximately 47 million in Transnet funding has been dispersed to this pot. That's about 17% that has been spoken for, with the remaining amount in the pot for use through the life of ordinance. Other funds that complement this are federal and local funding, as well as general fund money. Next slide, please. So where are we going? Or rather, where are we and where do we go from here? Next slide, please. In terms of where we are at today, SANDAG is going to continue a series of presentations to receive your input. And then in an effort to continue improving transparency and delivering on the region's commitments, SANDAG and partner agencies are working together to identify and secure additional outside funding. And that's in recognition of the fact that Transnet is meant to support and not fully fund all projects and programs. And of course, we will continue working with our partner agencies and all of you in order to continue ensuring the financial integrity of Transnet. Next slide, please. With that, we are here, Jim and I, for any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Ariana and Jim. Do we see any hands raised?
Yeah. I'm sorry, Minji, did you give me the floor?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Sandag, for that presentation. And I did post a comment, but really appreciate the information. And we know it's a super complex and challenging issues that are going to be presented to the boards for consideration to change the expenditure plan and potentially the Transnet formula, the flow of funds. So a couple of comments on that is, one is I think this committee actually understands the issues better than most laymen. And I would suggest that any proposed changes come to this, the CTAC, before they go to the Transportation Committee and ultimately the Board of Directors. And I would also just like to share that, you know, I really appreciate the transparency of where we're at. And like for many agencies, we have more projects than we have funding for. And I know Sandag's doing a great job to look for additional funding sources. So I'm 100% on board with that. And I'm so 100% on board with a lot of what's in the regional plan. The real challenge is to see and make suggestions on how we can maximize project benefits for our tax dollars. And one thing that has been a transformational change with the advent of the iPhone is transit service. And of course, we're seeing challenges with our transit ridership. And we want to make sure that our plans going forward, that we're not building infrastructure that's not going to be utilized and providing a good return on investment for our investments. So with that, I'd suggest that MTS and NCTD seriously look at going out for their own revenue enhancements, meaning going out to the voters for any increased services which they're looking at, because there's a lot of needs, as you know, Sandex staff, for the current Transnet dollars and how we can best leverage those. And I know we're discussing those suggestions with you, but there's a lot of opportunity out there to best serve our constituents, which are all of our constituents, with the Transnet dollars. And I just wanted to end with, I love Transnet's new slogan for Transnet, and that is faster, fairer, and cleaner. So I love that. You guys are doing great things, and I just want to continue with the conversation and make sure that we're focused on getting the best return on investment for the Transnet dollar. So I thank you for taking my comments first. I actually have a conflicting meeting, but I did want to jump on and share those comments and look forward to future conversations. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. Yeah, I see Zubir have a hand raised. Zubir, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Ariana, I have a question. I think it's more stems from some concern as a citizen for climate change. Would urban greening, where you implement trees in an urban setting, qualify as an environmental mitigation for local streets and road funding?
I will have to get back to you on that one.
Sounds good. Well, I mean, you can probably post it or whatever it is. I'm just, because I think it's a concern to a lot of the urbanizers or the people that lives in an urban with the heat that is stemming from the pavement. The green trees are a great way. So I can see it for local street, so
Yeah. Yeah, and as part of any update that we do make to the ordinance at some point in the future, a follow-on to that would be looking at, if you're referring to the local street and road section specifically, right, the board policy 31, which you're familiar with, that kind of includes that attachment about the typical types of eligible facilities under that. So all of that would have to be revamped, and those discussions we would definitely bring forward for you to weigh in on.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Zubir. I see Julie have a hand raised. Julie,
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate the presentation. That was really great information. Thank you so much. And I just want to echo Tom's comments with respect to CTAC's desire for you to come back and present to us what your recommendations are with respect to how we prioritize the remaining projects. And I just, I don't know if you've already started this effort with respect to the prioritization, but I think it's important that you look at the costs and the benefits of the project, and that you give us some tools as a region to be able to select those projects that are both the most cost effective, with respect to accomplishing our goal, but also the most environmentally beneficial. And so I just want to ask if you can evaluate that so that we can help to try to look at these projects from a regional perspective, but also without bias. Give us a way to really evaluate them. Is that something, Ariana, that you've already started working on? And can you give us some information with respect to how you plan to evaluate or recommend prioritization?
Yeah, no, not at this time. We haven't. So what we were asked to do by our board, by all of you, when we came to you in November, Transportation Committee, ITAC, is to take a deeper dive and kind of take a very comprehensive and thorough approach to analyzing the impacts of any changes that may potentially be made. And so that is the step we are taking right now. So so at this point, no, I don't have anything to share on that, but definitely we will, as Tom asked, and as you're asking now, come back with anything that may be proposed going forward so that you have an opportunity to weigh in.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you, Julie. I don't see any more hands raised. Tim, do you see any more hands?
No, Chair.
Thank you. I have one question myself for Ariana. During your presentation, one category is the local EMP, the Environmental Mitigation Program funds. How is that fund distributed to local agencies?
That is a good question. I wish I had my EMP folks here right now.
Oh, shit. Wasn't familiar with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing is you're familiar, with we have a grant program, right? A land management grant program, but then the funding that is available to the local agencies, I'm going to have to follow up with you on that, because our folks will have a better answer than I will. So
no problem. Thank you.
we'll get that back to you. Yeah.
Thank you. I see Sam has a hand raised. Sam, go ahead, please.
Yeah, just a thought of a question. Actually, I know Julie asked from the city of Skinny asked about the how do we prioritize the remaining funding, and with the current planning efforts that are going on, like the 5 big moves and the North County corridor study that we're doing with Sandex. How does that work into how these funds are allocated? I mean, there's a lot of recommendations coming out of those planning efforts. Does that kind of drive or influence how the remaining funds are allocated?
Which plans are you referring to? Which
like the regional plan update, for example?
Yes, so the ordinance requires consistency with the latest regional plan. So every time we update the regional plan, we should be updating the ordinance to be consistent with that. So I don't know if that helps answer.
I mean, how about as far as specific allocation of funding to projects that will result from the regional plan updates, as well as like the CMCP planning effort that is going on right now with Caltrans and Sandex?
Right. So, I mean, ultimately, right, we bring our budget to the board, and it's for the board to approve that. So it would be included in our budget. Does that answer?
Kind of. I guess, I mean, those plans result in a lot of recommended projects, right? A lot of, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's based on whatever priorities the board has set, and then we incorporate it into the budget for their approval.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Sam. I see Julie has a question again.
I do. I have one more question, and I don't know if you'll be able to answer it, Ariana, but I'm sure you know how to get the answer. And that is, I heard you mention the lockbox provision. And so we've talked about that a couple of times, and that's always been a little bit of a mystery to me. I'm wondering if there's been any guidance with respect to what those provisions are, and if you could share that with CTAC.
So the lockbox is something that was included with the original ordinance. So there's section 17, which talks about amendments to the ordinance. And there's a handful of provisions within the ordinance that are lockbox, one of them being the environmental mitigation program. And what that means when we say lockbox, it means that it cannot be changed by a vote of the commission like the other provisions within the ordinance can. It has to go to a vote of the people in order to be changed. So again, EMP is one of those lockbox provisions.
And what are the others? Can you?
Oh yes, let me just,
Thank you.
Well, the ITAC is one. Let me just open the ordinance real quick so that I don't miss any. And the RTCIP is another. I'm just going off the top of my head. The maintenance of effort for the locals, street and road is also one. And then let me just go back and check and see which ones I'm missing. So, oh, it's not section 17, it's section 16 amendment. So with the exceptions of section 2D, 3, 4E, 1, 8, 9, and 11. So 11 is the ITAC, 9 is the RTCIP, 8 is the MOE, maintenance of effort. Sections 2D, 3, and 4E1. So let me go back up there. So section 2, expenditure plan summary. Oh, sorry, 2D. Let me get that right. Yeah, that doesn't make sense because it has to change for the regional plan. Oh, 2D being the EMP, which we already talked about. And then 3 is related to, it's a general provision calling about speaking to the imposition of the transaction and use tax itself. And then 4E1 is a general provision. Oh, so when the first Transnet measure was in effect, there were 3 projects that were not completed by the time that ordinance expired, which were the SR 52, SR 76, and the Mid-Coast. And so those were priority projects in the Transnet extension ordinance, and those 3 projects have now been completed. So those that was the last one of in terms of lockbox provisions. So
Wow, great job. Thank you, Ariana. I appreciate that information. That's been a question for me. So thank you for taking the time to explain it.
Sure.
Thank you, Judy. Are there any other hands or anybody with questions? Seeing none. Well, going once, going twice. Okay, I think we're done with this item. Thank you, Ariana and Jim, for your presentation and answering all the questions. Thank you.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Then
Thanks
I'll
again.
turn it over to Mo.
Thank you, Minji. And one more time, thank you, Ariana, and thank you, Jim, for a very nice and elaborate presentation. We're on item number 8 and pretty much on time. That's great. So this item is an overview of Assembly Bill 43. Several weeks ago, we asked Zubair to kind of share his expertise on this item, and Alex and Zubair were able to organize themselves to put it on the agenda for today. So with that, I want to turn it to Alex, and then maybe between Alex and Zubair, we'll take care of it. Thank you, Alex.
So no, thank you, Chair. And if I may, I'd just like to provide some context here before I turn it over to Zubair. And as many of you know, this Assembly bill passed, and there's been past discussions in previous meetings about, bringing it to and put it in the agenda. But essentially, I'm not going to go through it. Zubair would do that. But in a nutshell, what the bill does is it changes the way all of you would change your speed limits, and really kind of focusing on some key considerations where start looking at, pedestrian, bicyclists as a safety as a key component to that. But also it provides sort of I would say, the local agencies or how you would do about changing the 5-mile increments, and how that would be carried out through studies or by new provisions or procedures. So it obviously touches on a lot of what you all do, but it also touches on what we're thinking strategically from a regional perspective. For example, one of the key elements of the regional plan is establishing a zero vision program in terms of improving safety regional wide. So the idea here is that we wanted to bring this item up in this particular meeting, but also future meetings. So I see this as a series of several meetings that we'll have. And really this first meeting really focuses on really understanding, and if you are aware of what's in the bill, that's great. But we have the great professor here who's going to give us a really kind of high level and really tell us what the bill is and what it's not. So he's going to go through an extensive discussion on that, and then turn it over to me, really kind of the next steps or what we envision in having future discussions. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Zubair.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Hey, Tim, do I assume that you're going to do the presentation? You're going to be leading the no, yeah. Going through doing the presentation, or you want me to do it myself? I don't know if I have it here, but I didn't know if you wanted Tim to go through the slides. Okay, I do have it. But anyway, like Alex says, good morning, everyone. And I'm really excited to share with you some of my knowledge, being, on the special task force to write or to amend the MUTCD based on this new AB 43. So it really is, it's the next that is coming in the future. But today I wanted to share with you what's in the bill from a legal perspective, and hopefully we can have some conversation. Caltrans still working, getting through what to put in the MUTCD, how to translate this law into the MUTCD, because most of us as a traffic practitioners, that's where we usually look at. And we don't usually look at really the California Vehicle Code, but we look at the MUTCD. So here it is. The title of the bill is to enhance safety. That is a really key. That's really is the key, or what drove this bill and why the legislator wanted to change how we set speed limit, because we wanted to enhance safety and look at what Alex was saying, Vision Zero, and how can we reduce fatalities for pedestrian and bicyclists, and vulnerable users, such as our citizens, such as, ADA, communities. So that's very, very key goal of the bill. So let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so this one here, and we're going to talk a little bit about the California vehicle changes, and that is today's presentation. Also in today, we're going to talk, we'll turn it back to Alex, and he's going to talk to you about the next steps. And hopefully in the near future, we'll come back when Caltrans comes out with the proposed changes in the MUTCD and present it to the California Traffic Control Devices Committee. Hopefully it will get adopted soon. And then I'll come back to you and present that at that time. Next slide. So this is, the original bill of the flyers, and you can see in the summary, according to the National Transportation Safety Board, speeding account for nearly a third of all traffic fatalities. So that's the, so we are talking about safety. How do we set speed limit in our mind to reduce, to improve safety? So that just, the flyer I wanted to share with you so you understand that, when you think about the 85th percentile, so start thinking, moving your head towards safety than just, oh, this is how fast people are driving. Next slide. Yeah, so I think with, Tim, just for the members, there are 10 sections or 10 sections of the California Vehicle Code that's been changes. So the first section here is the dealing with the definition of engineering and traffic survey. We all know that when we deal with roadway that are their speed are not set by legislators, such as the residential roadway or a business district, then we have to do these speed surveys. And that is the engineering and traffic survey. And in those surveys, they give you exactly what you need to do to get to that, to be able to set the speed limit. There are three things you look at when you do the speed survey: is the prevailing speed. When you go and measure the speed and say, okay, 85% of the people are driving at 47 or less, and that will determine what your speed should be. You look at your accident record, and generally we do compare that collision rate. We come out with a rate, which is collision per 1 million vehicle miles, and we compare it to a state average, or some big cities compare it to their own average because they have so much data from collision perspective that they can just do it in their localized, and that's a better way if you can do that. And then the section 3 of usually the ENT survey is the condition that is the highway conditions and the roadway conditions that is not apparent to drivers. You have a roadway and people are getting into collisions and you don't know what to do. You just say, hey, people are getting accidents. There's something happening here that I don't know what it is. And people getting into an accident, and you can use that excuse to lower the speed limit by an additional 5 miles per hour under a separate section of the California Vehicle Code. So in this bill, what does this bill here? All it did is when it talks about the residential density, it added another section called safety of bicyclists and pedestrian. Now, when we do an ENT survey, we have to keep that, we have to include that or evaluate that or consider that, the safety of the bicyclist and pedestrian. And this is just straight from the bill. With increased consideration for vulnerable pedestrian groups, including children, seniors, persons with disability, users of personal assistive mobility devices, and the in-house. You guys know what we're talking about. The in-house means, another word is the homeless people. So you got to consider that. So the legislature says there's no other way. Next slide. All right, so this is the fundamental section in the California Vehicle Code that we use to set the speed limit. And this section came in the California Vehicle Code, I think in 2008 or 2010, somewhere around that, when the California adopted the national MUTCD with which was in it saying that you need to set speed limit based on the 85th percentile. The national manual says to the nearest, period. So the legislature struggled around it and said, yeah, but sometimes we want to go to the lowest. We just don't want to go always to the nearest. This is the section that used to be in the bill under section 21-400 of the California Vehicle Code. This one is out, boom. They replaced it with almost the same section, but there is changes. So Tim, if you go, I guess not the next section, could you go to the slide, the one that is blue? Yeah, thank you so much. This is the new section that replaced that. And it says, if you read it, it says about the same thing. You know, you always establish the speed limit at the 5 miles per hour to the nearest 85th percentile of the free flowing traffic. However, in cases which the speed limit needs to be rounded up to the nearest 5 miles per hour increment of the 85th percentile speed, Caltrans or local authority may decide to round down the speed limit to the lowest increment. Then they added the last sentence. It says a local authority may additionally lower the speed limit as provided in section 22-358-7 and 58.8. Those two sections are a new section, and those are the next one I'm going to share with you. What are they? Here's a 28.7, and that's no, this one here. Yeah, 28. I think 8 and 9. Go back to the other slide. No, don't go too fast. Yeah, here. Oh, 7 and 8. Yeah, okay, so yeah, we're good. Yeah, so go to the next slide. 58.7. It talks about the local agencies or the safety corridor. So the legislature introduced this concept of safety corridor when you do the speed survey for consideration. So what is a safety corridor? That is what Caltrans is working on. So, you know, that will be, we'll leave it for the next presentation. And basically we're looking at a corridor that potentially it's being used by vulnerable users, but it's somehow there is more collision into it than a regular roadways. The definition is not here then. Here, all they say, the legislature says, hey, local agency, you can't say that all my roadways are safety corridor. You can identify only 1/5 of your roadway. For example, in the county, we have about 2,000 linear feet of roadways. That means we can say only 2,000 divided by 5, that's 400 miles of our roadway. We could designate them as safety corridors. So you do the same thing. That's the maximum you could do. And then you look at the corridor. So it says Caltrans will give you the definitions. You know, let's see, anything, local authority. Yeah, I think the other ones are the due date and all that stuff. So it really isn't that big a deal to the community because the Caltrans has to come out with a definition. They also have to come out with that definition before June 30th, 2024, or this committee called the Judicial Council has developed an outline tool for adjudicating infraction violations statewide. So if that task comes first, then that will be the due date. If that doesn't come first and June 30th, 2024 come first, then that will be the due date that we will be able to use this section of the California Vehicle Code for reducing the speed based on a safety corridor. Next slide. All right, so section 58.8. And this 58.8 is talking about a lot of agencies do speed surveys, and we are required by state law to do them every 7 years. We can keep the speed survey active for 10 years if the traffic if the professional engineer goes and evaluate the roadway and says, in my opinion, there isn't that much changes, and you write your opinion and you submit it to the court, and the speed survey stay good for 10 years. The local agencies approach the legislator and says, hey, you know, a lot of times when we do this, we are forced to raise the speed limit. So this section of the bill says you don't have to do that anymore. If you did a speed survey, that is a legitimate speed survey, means the speed that you have today, for example, you have 40 miles per hour. That was established based on a legitimate speed survey. You do not have to survey it again. you can use the previous speed survey to keep that speed data. However, Caltrans will come out with their changes in the MUTCD to really make it, because when you go to the next to the section that talks about the ENT survey and the duration of it, they increased it from 10 years to 14 years. The question is, after 14 years, can you keep it or not? That will be in the next presentation when Caltrans comes out with their opinion. But today, if you have a speed survey that was done 7 years ago, and you really don't want to change it, and that speed survey is legitimate, it means you did it according to the law, then you can keep it the way it is. You can keep that speed limit based on the old speed survey. So that's really what it is. And it also talks about you can't change it more than 5 miles per hour. So I say this section does not authorize a speed limit to be reduced by any more than 5 miles per hour from the current speed limit, nor below the immediate prior speed limit. So if you use the prior speed limit, you cannot reduce it more than 5 miles per hour. So let's say you had 40 miles per hour. And for some reason, you find that you want to reduce it 10 miles per hour because the community wants you to set it at 30 miles per hour. This section prohibits you from doing it. You can reduce only up to 35 miles per hour, 35 miles per hour, because that's 40 minus 5 miles per hour. The last section is no big deal. That's more the enforcement. It says if we are applying that, the first 30 days is all citations, not, the first 30 days is all warnings, not actual citations. The next slide. All right. I wanted to talk about this one here is the prima facie, is this new, they also introduced this new concept of business activity district. And the business activity district difference between what we have today in the vehicle code, which is business district, versus the business activity district, is that the business activity district can be on a 4-lane roadway. If you read today the California Vehicle Code for a business district, it's only a 2-lane roadway. This one is so now for an urban setting where cities wants to set the speed limit at actually 20, 25, or 30. It has some parameters that will determine that. But if you have a 4-lane roadway, I don't know, I'm just going to give an example, like probably Mo with his Pacific Coast Highway, and it's a 4-lane, but he knows it is a business district, and he wants the speed to be appropriate more at the 20 or 25 or 30 miles per hour because of all the activity that happens with it. And it gives you the definition, I think more of, like more than 50% of those, the people that, the land use is an actual business. It talks about the second B condition is that if you meet, under 4, no less than 50% of the contiguous property fronting the highway consists of retail or dining, commercial uses, including outdoor dining that open directly into the sidewalk. And really is, based on my knowledge of that roadway, it meets this one here, and he has parallel or diagonal parking along the highway. Hopefully he has, the traffic signal or stop sign at an interval no more than 600 feet. And he has marked crosswalk at uncontrolled locations. So if he has 3 of those 4, then he can name it as a business activity district, and he can set it for, 20, 25, or 30 miles per hour. Now, 20, 25, or 30 miles per hour, that will depend on the speed coming into it. What is it? So that's what guided of what it should be. So that I think is really is important to a lot of local agencies, especially the cities that have an urban setting. So that will help you a lot. And remember, this one here becomes a prima facie speed. That means you don't have to do the speed surveys, but the section that are coming in and going out of it, those are separate, and you have to do the speed survey, and the two are tied together. So it's a little bit tricky but you can, so it gives you another way of looking at your roadway and setting it up as a speed more to be more pedestrian friendly, more bicycle friendly than what we have now, and just setting up. You know, today, if you go to that roadway, you got to go during non-peak hours. You got to go where people are just going and maybe not caring about being there to, you know, and they will determine your speed. This one here says, no, those are not the only people that will determine what we set the speed for. Next slide. All right, so this is the last section here, which is we call, you know, in the, this is section 40,802. It's, you know, usually known as the speed trap section of the California Vehicle Code. And they went into it, and this section here, it says, you know, this is what is a speed trap, except this definition of speed trap does not apply to a local street, road, school zone, and they have added senior zone or business activity district. And here they give you those two definitions. So you, I mean, I don't know if you remember, you know, if probably, you know, I recall when I was at least in some of the local agencies to determine that a roadway is a local roadway, we used to use the old FAU, or today the FHWA map that Caltrans adopts, and it shows that roadway is a local roadway. Therefore, you can say, hey, this is a local roadway, identify in the map as called in the California Vehicle Code. Therefore, I am calling in a local roadways and setting a specific speed for it. So, and speed trap does not apply to it. So what did the legislator added? A senior zone. And all they said is that if you have buildings that serve seniors, and along the way you have a sign, which is a warning sign that says senior, you know we have that sign in the MUTCD, and you have it posted there, you can identify that section of the roadway as a senior zone. Now, the second one is the business activity district, and then it takes you back to what I've been talking about, the definition of a business district. And here, for some reason, the ENT survey here is the duration of the ENT survey is not in the definition, which is section 627, as I recall. It's in this section, and they have increased that duration, or how long is the ENT survey is good for, from 10 years to 14 years. So that's next. I think that this is the end of my presentation. Yes. So so this is really in general the vehicle code changes. So just remember, they added basically in a quick summary, they added the safety corridor, they added the business district. I think Tim, you took one slide that I wanted to share that I think it's important to the to the group, which is the section. Hold on, just bear with me 1 second. Oh yeah, this one doesn't. So the section I wanted to, or the change that I wanted to tell you is that in the California Vehicle Code, there are two sections where it says, okay, well, 65 miles per hour is the maximum. And local agency through speed survey, they can lower it to 60, 55, 50, 45, 40. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Tim. All right, so those are two sections, and it says, basically they change now if you go, so they say, well, we don't think 25 is the lowest anymore. We believe 20 is 20 or 15 is the lowest. So they added 20 and 15. So now if you go and survey a roadway that is very tight roadway, and you find that the 85th percentile is 19 miles per hour, before you couldn't set it for 20 unless it meets a certain condition. I think there are section of the code that says if it's a narrow roadway and all that stuff, you can, set it for. But if it's a regular roadways and you find it's 19 miles per hour, you have to set it at 25 minimum. But today, 19 miles per hour, I would set it at 15. So I just go to the lowest one and set it at 15. Now the new code gives you that. So for some of you and some of us, hopefully we can make use of it, and we have a lower speed limit on our roadway, lower limit for speed limit on our roadway. And this is the safety. Remember, we started this conversation about the safety to enhance safety. And the research had shown us that if the delta, the safety between the vulnerable users, the pedestrian or the bicyclist and the car drivers, the higher that delta, the higher the probability that vulnerable users will be a fatality. The lower the speed delta, the lower the probability that collision will be a fatality. And that really is, keep that in mind, a key in your mind, that when you go and set your speed limit, keep that in mind, that the lower the better within the law, the lower the better. Thank you very much, everyone. And I turn it back to Alex.
Thank you, Subir. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. No, thank you. So before we open up for any questions or thoughts, the last piece of this presentation is obviously there's a lot of information that Subir shared. And in light of, you know, a number of key activities that are still outstanding, and Subir alluded to them, you know, the reference to the updates to the California MUTCD, make sure that the law aligns with that. Caltrans is still working through its process, and they're going to be at some point taking input from local agencies as these revisions are implemented. But one of the things that we wanted to briefly chat is, because there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of momentum, is maybe perhaps the consideration of establishment of a task force, where this task force will consider and start thinking through, working with all of you and Sandex staff, how can we best support the implementation of this bill? There's a lot of agencies that have already moved toward implementation. So part of that task force could start reaching out to these agencies and start making a presentation and giving us some insight on how they're doing things toward implementation. I know, like for the city of San Diego, they started to work through that process by identifying, doing some initial assessment and coming up with criteria. But also another key piece is identifying key process or elements that Sandex staff could provide. Subir mentioned the provision to the safety corridors or the business districts. So if there's anything maybe from a regional perspective that Sandex could start working with all of you and start coming up even just basic with the data and start determining these safety corridors from a technical perspective. And then finally, the third piece for this task force is, again, Subir mentioned the opportunity to provide input and both to the California MUTCD revisions process, but also to the Caltrans consultation process. But the idea is, through that task force, you know, all of you and Sandex staff will meet and then start fleshing out a lot of these elements. But then we would have a standing meeting to the larger committee where they would report out, but also get input from all of you as things progress in the implementation of this bill. Yeah. So that's essentially sort of the elements that we want to bring to this for this specific meeting. But again, we anticipated having a standing item. But before we open it for comments or any volunteers, Subir, is there anything else that I missed?
No, I just wanted to add that, you know, Alex mentioned about the safety corridor. The discussion, I am also, like I told you, I am with the task force helping Caltrans to translate the law into the MUTCD, is that what is a safety corridor? Do you define the safety corridor based on the collision that happened to it? And you say, well, if it's a corridor that has, let's say, collision rate, collision per million vehicle miles of 10, then we will call it safety corridor. That becomes reactive of things. Or do you define a safety corridor with the physical element that are missing for pedestrian and bicyclists. And you say, no, we want to prevent the collision. We don't want it to happen. And then we can start saying lower the speed. We want to lower the speed before the collision happens. Then it becomes physical. And I remember, I recall bringing this item to the task force, and at least, you know, the people that worked with the legislature, they really said that that really was the intent of the legislation. They didn't say it here because they left it to Caltrans to define it. But this is something that the local agency now can say to Caltrans and the California Traffic Control Devices, hey, we really want you to define it that way. You have a roadway that we really is used by bicyclists, used by pedestrians, used by seniors, but we don't have a full improvement in it. Therefore, we really want to make sure that we reduce the speed limit to be considered as a safety corridor. That's one. And two, I think the definition, we also, I think I missed to tell you that in addition to the safety corridor, they also talked about land use that is high generators of vulnerable users, like the bicyclist and the pedestrian, and that you do the same thing. Is this really land use, or is it already have the collision? So these are key things that we could work on and influence. The law is already written, it's already passed. Is really how to translate, and what did the law give Caltrans to work on? So they put it on the MUTCD. And remember, the MUTCD is by law. We have, you know, Alex doesn't want me to get into the MUTCD, but by law, we have to follow the MUTCD. You can do it different way, but you really are, you know, putting your jurisdictions or your agency to a great liability if you're not following the California MUTCD. I just wanted to share that with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Zubair. At this point, I think we should take a few questions from the audience, if there are any. Please raise your hand and or open your video so we can recognize you. And while we are waiting for that, Zubair, I have a couple of quick questions for you.
Please.
When the code talks about 1/5 designation for safety corridor, it doesn't really, it's silent with respect to the classification of the road.
Right.
So is your understanding 1/5 is of the entire network, regardless of the class, residential, collector, major?
Yes, that is my understanding, and also the understanding of Caltrans and the task force, that they really didn't care of what type of roadway you're talking about. It just, the public agency has, like I said, county has 2,000, they can designate up to, but then they give you the criteria to designate what is the safety corridor, and you may not have in your city to say to get to the 1/5, but if you have enough to go over the 1/5, then you're in a bad luck. You can only designate up to 1/5.
Very good, very good. Thank you. That's what I thought. I just wanted to double check with you. I do have one other comment, but I want to go recognize John Kim for a raised hand, please, John.
Thank you. Just a question about some of the things that are going to be developed, the safety corridor definition, and also the identification of pedestrian and bike generators. Will the local agencies be able to participate in the designation of these types of facilities moving forward?
Yeah, so what I said is that now the bill is written, and it just leave it open, meaning they just say, we need public agencies or need agencies when they are setting speed limit to consider these two type of roadways or type of area surrounding the roadway. Now it's Caltrans that is making, what is it? The definition of it. And
Right.
that Caltrans works through the process of the California Traffic Control Devices Committee. And in it, they present they say, okay, here's what we think is defined. And you go as a public agency, whether you go or you present a letter, or like Alex was talking, if we for a committee, then we probably at the end of this committee, we'll write the letter. This is the position of the San Diego area on these, for example, these two elements of the new speed law. Here's what we think it should be. And you present it to the California Traffic Control Devices, and by law, they're supposed to, the California Traffic Control Devices by law is like a forum for local agencies with Caltrans to come out with a common decision to change the MUTCD. So yes, the answer, you have a lot of influence if you go or you address the California Traffic Control Devices Committee, so on this item.
So some sort of a submittal process to the device committee at some point.
Yes, or you go there, well, now they are virtual, or you just raise your hand and says, hey, what are you doing? This is what it should be, in our city, and here's the data, whatever it is. It's probably better to write, if you write a letter, because it becomes documented. And then, they have to address it. They may say, no, yeah, we understand what you're saying, but we disagree, and we're gonna vote it this way. That's one way. Or they say, yes, you got a good point. We want Caltrans to consider it. And they may ask Caltrans to go back to the drawing board and redefine the safety corridor and or the business, not the business activity, but high generator of vulnerable users. I think these are the two ones that they didn't define it.
Right.
This legislature didn't define it, left it for Caltrans and the process of the California Traffic Control Devices to come out with a definition and be added to the MUTCD.
Thank you.
So I just want to add to that too. I mean, that's where we're here for the ask. If any of you are interested in participating, where we're thinking and carrying, kind of getting everything that's happening through this task force, because it's an opportunity, as I think Subir is alluding to, it's an opportunity, but also it's an opportunity to hear what other agencies that are already moving with implementation. So we would be able to work with all of you and staff here and kind of move toward and get the momentum and see what we come together, because there's some regional elements that we also want to, I would say, advance to complement really the spirit of this bill.
Yeah, I mean, if I may add to what Alex is saying, because some of you may read the law, and the law says the law starts January 1st, 2022. The MUTCD hasn't changed. So it's basically we're in limbo time. What do we do? How do we do things based on the new law? Basically, technically, the old law is gone. It's the new law, but there is nothing. We don't have a Caltrans, we don't have direction. And I can tell you, the city of LA is part of our committee, and they said, we're gonna start implementing the way we see it. We're not gonna wait for Caltrans to come out with the MUTCD. I think this is more of a legal questions to your probably legal, counselor, if you want to do it. I think you probably are good either way, whether you are conservative and you wait for Caltrans, or you start doing it and you move on. I don't know how you do the safety corridor, because the law says Caltrans will define it for you. So you couldn't just sit down and says, no, I'm going to define it. Balboa Avenue is my safety corridor, and I'm going to go that way. So but the implementation of the additional 5 miles per hour with the senior citizen zone and all that stuff, I mean, it's pretty clear. It's not a lot of vagueness into it. So just wanted to, I think I saw, was Everett raising his hand? He was somewhere in here.
We have Maureen.
Hi, Alex and Sabir. Maureen Gardner, City of San Diego. I just wanted to thank you for bringing this extremely relevant item to the group today. And thank you, Sabir, for the presentation. You really just distilled that law down to all those primary components, and it was very clear and very helpful. And I would just want to volunteer to be on that task force. I think you're right. That's, there's the technical aspects and implementation, and a task force I think could really help that get implemented throughout the region. And I think just related strategically to all the other things we're trying to achieve in our region and cities, planning efforts, this just coincides and meshes with that. So I'd like to volunteer.
Thank you, Maureen. And Alex, maybe we could be a little bit more clear. We are asking for volunteers to be in Sandex task force. That's correct?
Correct.
Okay, and then are you going to assign a chair or a person to organize these groups? I mean, the group that potentially are going to get together at some point?
Yeah, we'll follow up with those details at this point. It's not going to be my team, but it's probably going to be somebody from the active transportation team that's going to be taking the lead on bringing everybody together, obviously with input from those that want to volunteer, and start breaking down maybe a work plan. And the 3 items that I mentioned, for example, maybe, include best practices, what else other agencies are doing now through the implementation, but also breaking down at what point do we want to consider the level of input, going back to Zubair's presentation for the Caltrans consultation process, input for the MUTCD via the Unit for Traffic Controls Committee. And then finally, what elements can we provide support, recognizing that maybe there's still some ambiguity on, the establishment, but we have GIS layers, we have, all this level of information that we could start working through and maybe putting a number of assessment or analysis together that speaks to the, like, for example, just the safety or the business district component.
Okay, all right. And then the next question is for Zubair. I know we're taking too much time on this. We're almost done with time. Zubair, is it your understanding that if this group is formed, it sounds like it is going to be formed, would Caltrans welcome feedback from the group? Would they recognize this group as, I don't want to use the word official, but basically an asset to provide feedback for whatever they come up with? It's a question for your working group.
Yes. Based on my experience, I think when you say Caltrans, you probably are referring to the MUTCD Caltrans.
I'm sorry, yes,
coordinators.
MUTCD is
right,
working.
not our
Yeah.
District 11 here, So
I got that. Yes, that's what I meant. Since you're representing that,
yes,
I just wanted to make sure that we don't really spin our wheels with no impact to that major group.
I can guarantee you that Caltrans, that group, will love to have input from us. They really
perfect.
is. I mean, because this, what we're talking here, I think I didn't also share the only changes for the state highways is that now the state Caltrans can designate a district and put in a 25 miles per hour. It used to be no. It used to be for state highway, no, but local roadway, yes. But now they changed it. That's really what impacts them probably directly. Everything else is really is a local issue. It's really is. So they would love to say, yeah, tell me what you think. And so I think based on my, knowing Johnny and the task force, they would love to have this input from us. And remember, the safety corridor, it was tied to that date of 2024. So it is not due now. So if we start working and Alex says we can look at the GIS layers and look at our region and all that stuff, we can develop something that is more of, has the technical background on it, and it's based on data, and we can present it to the task force or CTAC, or the California Traffic Control Devices through the Caltrans, secretary, and presented there that this is what we think you should be designating the safety corridor. I really think it's very valuable. And I think participation of the local agencies is really critical in making sure we get at least somewhat to what we want out of this code.
Thank you, Zubair. I appreciate that. Abe, you're on. I see your hand up. Hi, Abe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Quick question, Zubair, you've probably thought about it already. We went through this a few weeks ago when we came out and talked to our attorney. I want to see if our understanding is correct and you feel the same way. So the way we saw it, there is really not much change with regards to doing a speed survey and lowering by 5 miles per hour if the result of the survey ended in 1, 2, 6, or 7, meaning 31, 32, 36, 30, or 37, we would, before round down, standard mathematic rounding, to the nearest 5, and then we still had the option of lowering it by another 5. What we're doing now is the same thing. If the survey ends in 3, 4, or 8 and 9, we have to mathematically round up right now. Or if we decide to round down, then we do not have the option of the extra 5 miles per hour. So for the ones that end in the upper half of the 5 mile increment, this new law is helping us. But for the ones that are ending up in the lower half of the 5 mile increments, really nothing is changing. That is one understanding. So we are really adding this extra 5 mile reduction for speed survey results ending in the upper half of the 5 mile increments. And the second one, you kind of touched on it with LA saying, oh, we're going to start implementing it. The way we saw it, we really cannot benefit from this the way it's written right now, no matter what the changes to the CDC is, until this whole new language is added to MUTCD. So is it possible that like us or our attorneys would maybe create like a work group or a San Diego task force or something that we can come up with some sort of a regional agreement on how we can implement this before 24, like have a uniform approach toward implementing it?
Okay, so the first question is, or part A. So I probably should go through an example. I mean, Alex, how much time we?
Yeah, we were out of time and we apologize. I think we may need to follow up, Chair, with A, because these are more technical legal interpretations.
Yes.
And I think if we want to have that discussion, we could have that offline, but also if there's interest on that, we wanted to keep this presentation just kind of fact-based.
Yeah.
And we don't want to lose a lot of members.
But it does help
respectful of
just
times.
Yeah, Alex, just to add, I'm not going to go through an example to explain, to show it that either way, for A and B, it does help now. Now it's more. Now, potentially you could have a speed set at 12.49 below the 85th percentile. That's what the law, now gives you, is an additional 5 miles per hour. Whatever you did before, now an additional 5 miles per hour. Whatever you did before, if you went up, then you went down. That's if you went down, not up to the nearest one, then you can't use this section, which is a condition that are not apparent to drivers, but you can use this section if it's a safety corridor or it's an activity, it's an area that is next to high activity, and you go that 5 miles per hour. So it helps us. So the law does help us either way. But an example would be great, but we'll do it probably next time. I don't know, whatever you guys.
No,
want.
thank you.
I'm happy to.
You
see how excited I am about it.
I know you are, and I really appreciate your passion and knowledge on the presentation. It was excellent. I really took a lot from you. Alex, is it possible to get Zubair's presentation distributed to the group?
Absolutely. We'll follow up with all presentations. And before members leave, if you're willing to participate in the task force, please shoot us an email and we'll also do that in the follow-up email.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Minji to close the meeting. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Zubair, for the informative presentation. I also want to thank Sandex staff for the presentation today, and also for organizing and running this meeting smoothly. And our next meeting is scheduled for April 21st. With that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.